Hey guys, what's going on? It's Buns. Welcome to the Legion class overview for Death Knight. Now, I spent the last day figuring out what the heck is going on with Death Knights, because for me, I've never played one really on live too much farther than outside of the starting zone. I think the highest DK I've ever gotten was to like level 61 or 2, which is, that's like nothing. It's never been a class that's really gravitated to me too much. And also to go with that, I think for a lot of people that don't play Death Knight, similar to myself, it's always been one of those classes where I'm like, okay, this class does an absurd amount of damage regardless of spec, but like, how are they doing their damage? And I've never really like fully understood it. But after being able to test around with it a little bit on beta going into Legion, I got a better idea, and hopefully I'll be able to give you guys a good overview to figure out which spec you want to play, or if you're interested in playing DK in the first time. I had a pretty good time. Some specs were appealing, other specs weren't. Let's jump into it. I'm going to start off with the tank spec first, which is Blood DK. So, as Blood DK, obviously you are tank, and in previous expansions where Blood DK has actually done pretty well, I think that the damage isn't reliable enough, really, to be in like a 3s or competitive PvP situation, but it is pretty fun. You have a lot of your core abilities that you're really going through on your DK is Heart Strike, which costs 1 rune. Now, as a DK, you have 2 different pools of energy that you're coming from. One is your runes, which are up here in the top left corner, which you have 6 of. And previously, like in other expansions where they had certain types of runes and certain powers of rune, I don't remember exactly how it worked out. I didn't play that much DK before. Now you just have one category of runes. It's just straight up runes. There's not like Blood, Unholy, or Frost runes. It's all one category. So you have your runes that you can generate, and a lot of your abilities use that, such as Heart Strike. It uses runes, and that's one of your main attacks. It does about 80,000 damage, and it reduces the target's movement speed by 50%. Then you also have your second pool of energy that you're using your attacks from, which is Runic Power, which is right above that. So let's say I go up to the target here and I hit him with Heart Strike. You can kind of see the damage it does. I get a little bit of leech healing back. That's reasonable damage, but it's also getting me Runic Power. Now, Runic Power is also used as another expense for your spells, and it can be used in abilities like Death Strike. And Death Strike, as you have it as every single spec of Death Knight from what I saw. It's just as Blood DK, they buff it up a lot. It's a very big part of your rotation. It does 200,000 physical damage, and it also has a healing effect on it, which heals you for 20% of all damage you've taken in the last 5 seconds, which is a pretty cool feature. So if you're taking hard bursts, you can use Death Strike and get a lot of energy and get a lot of health out of that. But at the very least, even if you're not taking that much damage, you at the very least get 10% of your minimum health, which is pretty good. So that's your heal back, and it's a way for you to not only heal yourself, but it's a good damage efficient. 200,000 damage is quite nice. Now, a few other cool abilities that you get as Death Knight that you did not have before. One of those abilities is called Blood Drinker, and that's a talent I believe that I went into in my first row. Yes, it is. And it's kind of like a drain life that you can do on the move. So it drains about 400k health from the target, and you can use it while moving, but you just can't use other offensive abilities while it's going on. But it looks really cool, so I'll show you guys what that one looks like. You're like doing a drain life basically on the move, and it does big damage, so that's pretty cool. Not the longest cooldown ever. It's 30-second cooldown, which I think is fair. You also have Marrow End. Did I pronounce that right? Marrow? Bones? Doctor, right? Blood? Makes sense? Marrow? Okay, Marrow End. Costs 2 runes, and you hit the target for about 175k damage. But what it does is it generates Bone Shields. And what Bone Shields do is Bone Shields give you a buff, which reduces all damage you take by 16% and increases your haste by, I think, 10%, if that's right? Yeah, 10%. And each damaging attack consumes a charge. So it leaves like a shield up on top of you that is beneficial for you while you're being attacked. So it's part of your way as a Blood DK to do damage, but also reduce the damage taken to you. So it looks like this. It does pretty good damage, and you can see the Bone Shield charges up top. It costs 2 runes, but it does fairly good damage, and it gives you a buff to help you take less damage and do a little bit more with that haste. Now, one of the last really big abilities that you have as Blood DK is your Blood Boil, which does good damage. It's on like a 7-second recharge about. It does 130k damage to everyone, but it also puts Blood Plague up on everyone. Now, there's 2 ways to apply Blood Plague to people from what I saw. One was Blood Boil, which is an AoE damage, good damage, and the nice thing about it is it doesn't cost Runic Power or runes, so it fits into your rotation very nicely when you're trying to fit in a spell that doesn't incorporate one or the other. it's that in-between ground, which is great, and it spreads your bleeds, or your plague, I guess I should say, your blood plague or whatever. The other way that you can apply your blood plague, which I would not really recommend from what I had testing with it, is Death Caress, and it's a 30-yard range way to apply your plague to someone. So if you're running back, if you're like far away, and you need to get the plague up for some reason, you can do it. It's available to you, but I think most of the time when you're up in people's face, you won't be using that ability that much. Now, some of the bigger cooldowns that you have as DK, I spec'd into a talent called Bone Storm, and what Bone Storm does is, let me get my runic power up here a little bit. It's like a AoE Blade Storm, basically, that you launch at a target, and it does damage to everyone. It does like 45,000 damage every second while it's up, but it also heals you for 1% of your health for every second that it lasts. And however long it lasts depends on how much runic power you spend. So right now, I'll launch it, and it's going to last for 10 seconds because I had 100 runic power when I used it. So pretty cool ability. Then you also have Death and Decay, which is great. Your Death and Decay allows you to do your Heart Strike as AoE when you're standing in it, which is pretty cool. And then finally, your big artifact weapon is called Consumption. It's a 200k physical damage ability, and it heals you for 100% of that. So if you hit someone for 200k, you're healing yourself for 200k. It's on a 45-second cooldown. Very nice. Your last few defensives that you have is DK, Vampiric Blood, which increases the maximum health of your character by 45%, and also the healing you take by 45% on a short cooldown, minute and a half cooldown. Very cool. You also have AoE Grip with Gorfine's Grasp. It just doesn't work on these targets, but it is there. Very cool ability. And your last big defensive is Dancing Rune Weapon, which increases the effectiveness of your weapon and how much damage you do, making a duplicate of what you attack, but also increasing how much you heal from it as well too, plus 40 parry. So it's a really nice defensive. That pretty much sums up Blood DK. There's not too much to do. There's some different talent builds that you can go. I kind of went with the route that I felt was going to be the best for PvP, but if you felt like you wanted to take less damage, you could definitely go another route. So I'll just hover over my talents here, give you guys a quick idea. I went down the route where I wanted to be using it in PvP combat. This is not really a tanking route. It does fine, but if I really wanted to do something that was more tanky, like in my last row, for instance, I took Bone Storm, which I told you guys about earlier. I mean, that's just straight up damage. I want to be doing damage, and it's another ability that I have, whereas like Blood Mirror and Purgatory are a lot more defensive. So I was like, you know, I'm trying to do damage. So for the sake of the video, that's the build I went. There's your 101 Blood DK. Pretty good healing. I thought it was fun. I just don't think it's going to be used that much in PvP. Maybe you'll see it in 2s. I don't know how well it's going to do in 3s. I don't think it does enough damage. But you have two other really good options. First off, you got Frost DKs. Now, Frost DKs are pretty nutty. And let me go through some of the passives right off the bat. So, Darksucker we can kind of ignore. It only matters if you kill someone, but it increases the healing you get from your Death Strike, in case anyone was curious. Killing Machine. Okay, so Killing Machine. Your auto attacks have a chance to make your next Obliterate automatically critically strike. Now, your Obliterate. That's probably your main move as a Frost DK. It's a general attack that costs 2 runes, and it does 90k physical damage. Helps regenerate some runic power for you as well too, and it's spammable, it does big damage, and it also combines with Killing Machine. Now, I spec'd into a talent, if I can find it here, that also makes my killing Machine work with Frost Scythe. And it is just comboed with the Frost Scythe ability. So, Frost Scythe is an ability that I spec'd into that I've been having a lot of fun with. And it does about 25k damage, but here's the catch. This attack benefits from Killing Machine now. So Killing Machine, when it procs from your auto attacks, makes your Obliterate instant crit, or your Frost Scythe instant crit. God, that is hard to say. Frost Scythe. Instant. I felt like I had a lisp there for a second. Oh, that was goofy. Okay. Anyways, but with Frost Scythe is when you get the critical strike, it does 4 times the normal damage. And it's an AoE ability, so it does huge damage. I really saw that as a positive talent. I went with it. I really enjoyed that part of the build. So you can use that a lot in rotation. Now, your Mastery. Your Mastery is pretty much increasing all frost damage done. Pretty straightforward. You have your Obliterate. Rhyme makes your Obliterate have a 45% chance to cause your next Howling Blast to do 300% extra damage. Which your Howling Blast is this ability right here. And I guess originally the damage does blast the target with Frigid Wind, dealing 22,000 damage, and it puts a dot over them over time, which is your Frost Fever. And the Frost Fever is a disease for 24 seconds that does about 160k over that time period. So that's your dot. But basically what you can do is if you run up to someone and you get an Obliterate crit, like I did right there, you have a 45% chance per Obliterate to get a huge buff on your Howling Blast. Now look how much more damage this is. It's 100k damage when I look over the toolkit, or the tooltip. So you do that, and it's a lot more effective to use your Howling Blast to get that burst with the Obliterate. So, your final abilities that you're really going to be using all the time is Frost Strike. And I went into this with a talent at the very beginning in the first row to increase my haste every time I use it. And Frost Strike's what you're going to be dumping your runic power on. So basically as a Frost DK, you're going to go up, get Obliterate up, put your Frost Fever up, and then you're going to start using your runic power on Frost Strike. Now, your Frost Strike can also proc a huge damage buff for your... Oh, wait, no. Hang on to that thought. That is Unholy. Hang on to that thought for a second. I was getting ahead of myself there. So, your main abilities are the ones I mentioned. You have Obliterate that goes through your 2 runes, generates some runic power for you to use Frost Strike, which increases your haste, and you have Howling Blast that can get buffed by your Obliterates. Your auto attacks can give you a chance to make your Obliterates crit, and your Frost Scythe crit. Now, you also have a few other abilities that are pretty cool. Okay. Let's just get this one out of the way, alright? So, if you haven't played beta yet or haven't seen DKs probably have the most broken ability with their artifact weapon. It's Syndragos' Fury. They literally summon a fucking dragon out of the sky and kill everything in its way, doing like 600k damage. So, without further ado... Yeah! God! Well, why can't I feel like DKs, everyone should get an ability like that. Like, come on! They got a fucking dragon that comes out of the sky and kills everything in the way. I mean, it's a long cooldown, I get it, but like, goddamn, like, what the... Every other spec got snubbed, man. Holy cow. So that's pretty ridiculous damage right there. If you line it up on a few people, you're gonna kill half the team, like, at the same time. So, Frost DK isn't broken at all, is basically what I'm getting at. You also have an ability that I spec'd into called Glacial Advance, which causes spikes to come out of the ground and do about 100k damage. It's on like a 10-15 second cooldown. You also have Grip, as well as AMS, and you also have Wraithwalk, which I didn't cover as blood, but you get as every single spec as DK, and it's your way to get away now. So basically how Wraithwalk works is, it gives you 70% increased movement speed, but it also takes you out of roots, and you can't be rooted during the process as well too. There's also specs that you can go into it, depending on what spec you are playing, to take you out of stuns as well too, which is pretty OP if you want to go that route. The last thing really is Frost DK that you have. Big cooldowns is you have your Pillar Frost, which just straight up increases your frost, your strength by 20%. So it adds to your abilities, and you also have Remorseless Winter, which is an AoE damage, slows the targets down near you, does big consistent damage. So Frost DK, very, very cleavy, but like single target cleavy. It's not like a lot of dots going everywhere, but it is a lot of pressure, and you can really mount up on a group of people when you have them stacked with abilities like Frost Scythe, your disease going out. Very cleavy. Anyways, that pretty much covers it for Frost. Now finally, the last spec that we have is Unholy. So I told you guys to hold on to a thought for a second. I'm going to go through how the main abilities work for Unholy here. And it was something I was jumping the gun on a little bit when I was explaining Frost DK. So, we'll start off with the passives again, because I think they're important for Unholy DK. So, your Mastery as Unholy DK is just straight up increased shadow damage. Pretty straightforward, 33% increased damage. Your Runic Corruption. So this is one of the ones I think is really cool. So you have a 1.25% chance per runic power you spend, which is your bar up here, not your runes, your runic power, just to make that clear. So it's like Tactician for Warrior, if you guys saw the Warrior guide. When you use your runic power, you have a chance to increase your rune regeneration by 100%, which is really helpful because you're going through your runes very fast, and it's a good way when you get that buff up to be rewarded and help through your rotation. Then finally, your auto attacks have a chance to make your next death coil cost no runic power. Now, let's work through the main abilities here. So, Death Coil is your runic power dump. It does about 30k damage, and it gives you 10 energy to your pet as well too, which we'll explain in a little bit here. It's your runic power dump. It does pretty consistent damage, but you can combo it with a few things. Now, Festering Strike. That's your consistent damage. It does 2 runes. It costs 2 runes to use, but what it does is it puts your target up with Festering Wounds. And Festering Wounds is a buff that, or it's a disease or buff that you put up on the enemy target, and when you use Scourge Strike, which is an ability that does about 70k damage, basically 40k damage, or excuse me, 40k physical damage and 30k shadow damage combined together for about 70k. It causes your Festering Wound to burst. So if you use that, let me see if I can refresh it here. Okay. So you use your Scourge Strike, and it causes one of these things to burst. And it's AoE as well, too, which is pretty crazy. So you can really get some pressure going as Unholy DK. This, to me, looks like the cleaviest spec ever. And I'm talking about not just DK, I'm just talking about period right now. This seems insane to me. So, what you want to do is you get your Festering Wounds up on people with your Festering Strike. That gives you a buff to make your next Death Coil possibly be free, which is great when you're trying to maximize your damage done. And your plague that you get is called Outbreak. And Outbreak basically puts it does a little bit of damage, but it also puts Virulent Plague on the target, which spreads. And Virulent Plague, just as anything that's nearby, causes it to spread to the next target, so you can see it spread over there. And I spec'd into an ability called Epidemic, which every time I use Epidemic, it deals 50k damage to anyone that's affected with the plague, and a little bit of dot damage over time. So it's very nice to get pressure up. Unholy DK is a lot of fun. And on top of that too, as Unholy DK, you are able to get pets out. So, you have Raise Dead, which for me, I spec'd into Abomination, or your Sludge Belcher, and your Sludge Belcher does more damage than what the normal pet is. And I think that that's probably the best talent you want to go with in this row, if you just want to do damage. So, I went with this talent, I had fun trying it out. Your pet does pretty considerable damage. You can also upgrade your pet basically by this move called Dark Transformation, which increases the power of your pet. So normally you see my pet here hitting for 8k about with its abilities. You can use Dark Transformation, turns into this big ass freaking ugly piece of shit and starts whacking things for like 20k. So it like doubles your damage right there. Very fun to use. And then I'm also currently spec'd, I wanted to show you guys this one as well too. I'm currently spec'd into Dark Arbiter as my last talent, and the last row of talents for Unholy DK are very, very cool. So, originally I was trying out Defile, I also tried out Soul Reaper and Dark Arbiter, and I think that every single row of the last talent for Unholy offers different things. So, without further ado, you have an ability normally called Summon Gargoyle, which summons like one of the gargoyles out of the sky and it attacks you for 15 seconds, but it didn't really do that much damage, and it was on a 3-minute cooldown. So, your Valkyr, which I summon into, it attacks for the same amount of time, but what happens is that every time it gets 1% increased damage for every 1 runic power you spend, which is a lot. So basically what you want to have is you want to have full runic power up, which we do, summon your Arbiter out, and you're going to do huge damage. So I'm going to show you just for the sake of it, I'm going to summon my thing, let it hit a few times just so you can see what it hits for normally. So it's hitting for quite a bit of damage. I'm going to start spending some runic power and you'll see how much the abilities start scaling. She starts hitting for like 100k, 200k. It gets nutty really fast. So it's a 3-minute very bursty cooldown, but you can use it if you want to go that route. I think it's kind of fun. I didn't originally spec into it, but I had some fun with it. Now, Defile takes your Death and Decay, makes it this like huge blob on the floor, and when you attack in it, increases your mastery by 200, stacking up to 10 times, which is just a straight up damage increase, and it takes it from 33 to 46% when you're actually topped all the way, which is a lot of damage. And it slows people in as well too, and it causes your Scourge Strike to be able to hit multiple targets while you are in the Defile. So I thought that was a very cool ability as well too. I didn't like Soul Reaper as much. I felt like the other two were very consistent, but if you wanted to go for a DK haste build, so what Soul Reaper basically does, it's a 1 runic attack that you can use on a 45-second cooldown, and you put a buff up on the target. Now what you want to do first off is you want to make sure that the target that you apply Soul Reaper to has Festering Wounds on them. And what you do is when you apply Soul Reaper, Using Scourge Strike into that, bursting the Festering Wounds, will give you 7% haste for 15 seconds, and it stacks 3 times up to 21% haste. So if you go with this all haste build and you want to have a lot of pressure up, you could combine it with things like Ebon Fever, which reduces the amount of time Virulent Plague does its damage in, where normally it does its damage in, I think, like 24 seconds or something like that. 21 seconds. It doesn't at half the time. If you want to go this full haste build, it is available to you as well. I went with a build that was more generated around using my Festering Wounds with Bursting Sore, which increases the damage I do when I burst the wounds, and Castigator, which increases the benefits I get from using Festering Strike and Scourge Strike. But basically, Unholy DK ended up being a lot of fun. If I were to play DK, I would probably play Unholy. It seemed like probably the strongest spec of the 3, and I just like the feel of it being very cleavy, very AIDS. You're just sitting there spreading a ton of damage out on everyone. Right down my alleyway. So if I ended up playing DK, even though it didn't really have a ton of CC to offer, I would do that. Now the CC that is available to you, some of it's available into your honor tree, like Dark Simulacrum, which is that ability where you can steal people's spells, basically. Which I think is really cool, very diverse spell, depending on when you use it. It could be a poly, it could be damage, very cool spell. And you also have talents into, you could use, I can't think of the name of the ability off the top of my head. Asphyxiate and other talents as well, too, depending on what spec you're playing. It's a little different for each one. And then finally, the other honor talent that you don't get to mess around with right here is Necrotic Strike. And you don't get to mess with that, it's an honor talent specific, but Necrotic Strike is pretty much the absorbent of heals for when you're attacking. It does about 30k damage, and it absorbs the next 100 healing that target's taking. So when you start snowballing pressure, you can start using your Necrotic Strike, and they can really pressure the enemy team's healer from being able to keep you up. I think Unholy looks really fun. I think it's going really under the radar right now, because I feel like a lot of people that are streaming live or streaming beta are not really playing DK, so I'm surprised that it hasn't gotten more attention, because I actually think Unholy is really strong. Very broken, and I think you'll be seeing it a lot with double melee cleave. Anyways, guys, that wraps it up for me here. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know if you have any questions or comments that I missed out on the video. Be happy to answer them for you. Thanks for all the support, guys. I will see you next time. Have a good one, homies. Later!